Hello and welcome back to An Old Man Watches, and today I'm going to be talking about the 1949 film noir Alimony. And our main character, I guess, in some ways, certainly our narrative point of view, is Dan Brown, a struggling composer who lives in a boarding house with a number of other people, including his girlfriend Linda. The pair are just waiting on Dan to finally sell some music so they can start their life together, when into the house comes a glamorous bad girl new tenant, Kitty Travers. She's the brunette on the image in your screen as opposed to the blonde. Kitty has her own somewhat shady life and career going on, and she doesn't pay Dan much attention at first. At least not until he seems on the verge of making a big sale. Then she suddenly, and not so coincidentally, expresses romantic interest in him. Dan's head immediately gets turned, he breaks up with Linda to be with Kitty, even writing his new lady friend a song, which, as far as I can tell, is an original tune specifically written for this film. But then the expected sale falls through, and Kitty dumps Dan just as fast as he dumped Linda. As the film's designated good girl, and it being the 1940s, Linda obligingly takes Dan back. They get married, and sometime later, Dan finally does get that big money-making sale. Ironically, with the song he wrote for Kitty. And wouldn't you know it, Miss Kitty Travers is suddenly interested in renewing her relationship with old Dan. Will he show himself to be made of stronger moral fibre this time around? And what of Kitty's shady other gig? Will the piper finally have to be paid for that? Well, given that this is an American film made in 1949, the answer to the last question is definitely going to be yes. The restrictive Hays Code was still being stringently enforced at the time, and it was a requirement that all criminal action must be punished. Having transgressed against the law, Kitty must pay the price. That is just how movies work in this era, at least if they're American. The much more open and pertinent question, of course, is should you watch this movie? And sadly, despite the fact that I found it pretty watchable for much of its runtime, my ultimate answer has to be no. Despite having a breezy pace and a decent cast, including Martha Vickers, who played a significant supporting role in the 1946 classic The Big Sleep, she plays Kitty Travers, the movie has a few big issues that ultimately drag down what could have been a harmless diversion. So, let's talk about where it goes wrong. I have a couple of friends who write professionally, and on more than one occasion I've heard them say writing a good ending is one of the most challenging parts of writing fiction. And given the mess of a finale offered here, it's definitely a challenge that Alimony completely fails to meet. I think the underlying problem comes from an ill-advised attempt to meet two competing and not at all aligned goals. First, satisfying the aforementioned all criminal action must be punished mandate of the Hays Code, and second, the ever-present Hollywood desire to offer us a happy ending. The former criteria means that Kitty has to get her comeuppance, and the latter means that either that comeuppance must be the happy ending, or the script needs some other feel-good moment. Now, option one doesn't really work because while the film's advertising does emphasise her penchant for preying on innocent dupes, Kitty doesn't actually come across as all that awful in the course of the movie. Yes, she's clearly only interested in Dan when he has money and her primary form of income is shady. She helps a divorce lawyer win bigger alimony payments for his female clients by being the other woman in incriminating photos of the husband. But, Dan doesn't put up much of a fight. And neither, I suspect, do the husbands. So they are complicit in everything that she does. And certainly I don't have a lot of sympathy for Dan being seduced. He certainly doesn't seem to make any effort not to be. Possibly with that in mind, the script decides that the happy ending will be that Kitty will have a sudden change of character and swears to go and live a virtuous life now that she's out on parole and reunited with her father. And this just kind of all falls entirely flat, to my mind. Ironically, the root of the finale's failure lies in the very first minute of the film. You see, almost all of the movie's story is a flashback narrated by an older and wiser Dan Barker as he helps Kitty's father find his estranged daughter. This creates the challenge that ultimately this whole movie is Kitty's story, which is why you said, is Dan the protagonist? He's certainly the narrator. Everything is told through his perspective and words, but the film can't end with Dan and his life. Linda took him back again, by the by, which in 1949 was probably supposed to be a happy outcome for them. The movie is ultimately really about Kitty and her journey, and so it has to end with her. And so the film gets straitjacketed into, Kitty suddenly decided to turn over a new leaf, or at least that's how it turned out. Of course, a substantially different script could have been written even within these requirements. Perhaps one where Kitty paid for her crimes earlier in the runtime, giving the film more space to show her slow turn to redemption. You'd probably want to jettison the whole flashback structure to do that, but I'd argue that would be a positive in any case. The film's current structure underlines that all of the main narrative events are in the past, and in doing so, it gives you a lot of hints as to what the sort of narrative we're going to see, the fall of the Scarlet Woman, which rather robs the plot of any mystery. But, perhaps that familiarity was a selling point back in, 70 plus years ago. I don't know. Now, I've already made some references to the film's last big flaw, which is that it's rather short on characters to care about. Should we care about Kitty? She's the person the film's all about, after all, but she's also a calculating, greedy, and not terribly honest person. Her last-minute reformation doesn't change any of that. Should we care about Dan? For my mind, he's rather too quick to dump his long-term girlfriend and then his wife when a more attractive woman, at least superficially, gives him the come hither. Should we care about Linda? Well, I certainly can sympathise with her, I guess, but she's not really in the forefront of the film, and it's not like she has much of an arc. She's just the woman Dan keeps going back to. What about Kitty's dad? His search for his daughter kicks off the film, and their reunion is our wedged-in happy ending. Well, problem is he's barely on screen, so it's hard to feel much involvement with him. Alimony is a film without anyone the audience can really care about, and that's a very large problem that it simply has no way to overcome. Next time, in the mid-1960s, an American company edited together 4 TV movies from episodes of Japan's first celluloid superhero serial, Supergiant. Very unwisely, I've watched all 4 of these. But that's next time. Until then, thanks for watching this video, and I hope you enjoyed it.